Will, so many founders come to us and they say, I need to raise money, raise money, raise money. There's a flip side to that, and it's called bootstrapping. So founders ask all the time, should I bootstrap or should I raise? A lot of times they don't even know bootstrapping is an option. So maybe we can discuss what is bootstrapping and when should you use it versus raising capital.
So bootstrapping is everything you do when you don't have money. I mean, to put a fine point on it, it's what people have been doing since the dawn of time. It's what 99% of businesses do as a default. Only in the startup world do we think about raising capital, and capital tends to go to a very small number of companies. But bootstrapping is essentially, how do I use the resources that I have right now, what's in front of me, to make stuff happen, to create product, to create income, et cetera. And I think for a lot of founders, they're like, yeah, but I need a lot of stuff right now, right? I need to hire people, and I need servers, and I need, inventory, I need whatever. So of course I need capital, otherwise I can't start. And yes, certain things cost money, but I don't necessarily think that raising money is the only place to start. I always tell founders, raising money should always be your second option. Your first option should be, what can I exploit with the resources that I have, which is essentially bootstrapping.
Now, just to get a little pedantic about this, defining, a lot of people clump in bootstrapping, such as taking out a loan, credit cards, even a very friendly loan from a rich uncle, things like that. When we say raising capital in startup world, we're talking about going to institutional funding, investors that want to do this professionally, we need to see a 5, 10, 50, 100x return. That's what we're defining as raising capital.
You bet. And also, again, when you need $250,000, $500,000, $1 million in those early stages, chances are you're not going to have that on hand. However, one of the factors that people don't consider when they're saying, hey, should I bootstrap or raise capital, is by bootstrapping, you should be looking at building a sustainable version of your business, even if it's a small version, even if it's generating $5,000 a month, something that can keep this thing moving for an extended period of time. And that should be the primary focus. So it shouldn't be about, should I bootstrap or raise capital? It's, I should bootstrap. That should be my primary motivation. And maybe I'll raise capital.
Your default, because raising capital, something weird happens, Will. And I know you've seen this multiple times. I've fallen into that trap, but you raise capital. Let's say, you get a check for $250K, it hits the bank.
Right.
And then everybody kind of breathes a sigh of relief, which is nice. But then everybody starts thinking, well, now we're going to run this business on raised capital investor funds versus building a sustainable business that actually makes money. It's weird.
Yep.
Like the mindset completely shifts.
Let's stick with that. I think we should be in the bootstrap mentality and sometimes have extra capital, right? We should stay in the bootstrap mentality as if this is the last dime we'll ever see, because it probably will be statistically. And then say, hey, in capital will help. What you're saying is we move into capital welfare. We move into this place where we're like, let's be entirely dependent on capital in order to operate our business, which is wildly dangerous and ends poorly most of the time.
And you know how I can tell right away? I'm looking at pitch decks. It's the ass slide. We are raising $1 million for 18 months runway. And then the future plan is then we're going to raise the next round. And to me, I really think investors have soured on that approach. But if you go to an investor and you say, we've bootstrapped it to this point in time, we don't need capital. In fact, we're just cracking. Like, we've got founders in our community right now who I'm so stoked and bullish on, because they're like, yeah, we're thinking about raising capital, but we just hit profitability, so we might not need it. And I say, actually, this is the best time to raise capital, or put your feelers out there, because if you have that story as a founder and you go to investors and say, we bootstrapped it, and now we know our customer acquisition costs, we know lifetime value, we know our unit economics, COGS, all that stuff, and we can pour gasoline on the fire with your capital, and we can go into hyper growth, man, that is such a great story.
Let me build on that a little bit. So there aren't that many people on that end of the spectrum that are going out in that kind of profitable, positively leveraged state. Most people are on the other side of it, right? Where they need a ton of resource, they have no revenue, whatever. And so yes, if you have profitability, it puts you in the catbird seat, which is awesome. Most people aren't there. So I think part of what we're saying too is, how would I treat that capital if I got it? And I always tell people, treat it like it's the last check you'll ever see, because statistically it is, right? Most people don't make it to the next round. And so most people, when they get that big lottery ticket cash, they think to themselves, oh, we made it now. And to your point, oh, we'll burn through it to the next 18 months. And while that's true to an extent, like capital does tend to run in 18 to 24 month cycles, you also need to treat it when you get it like you might not get it again.
Yes, this affects how much you raise, and it affects how you plan. And it's just, I think in Silicon Valley, they called it cargo culting. I never fully understood where this came from, but it's like, hey, we got a check, and now we need to look like we're successful. We successfully raised. So let's hire a whole bunch of people. Let's get a big office. Let's get that ping pong table, everything like that. Like, I've seen that happen over and over again. It's crazy.
And what's so funny is it's one of those things, one of those moves where when it works, it looks like it worked because you did that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work so often. Remember, like maybe 2 in 20 of venture investments will ever work. And we only talk about the two. No one ever like is calling up TechCrunch say, will you please interview me for how I just burned through $100 million, right? No one's looking for that coverage, right? What most folks, most startups, most founders don't hear is the narrative of when that looked so stupid, unless it went god awful, we work bad. Ed, you and I hear all the stories, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we see the inside baseball and we see how many founders pull that move and how often it fails miserably. And we're like, oh, I just don't do it.
Well, let's talk about the danger then on the other side, because we've advised startups where the investor comes in and literally tells the founder to light the capital on fire. We need you to hire more people. Spend 25, 50 cents of every dollar on growth, Google ads, everything like that. Now, hopefully that time has passed, but what founders don't realize is that the investor or the VC firm, they're trying to load you up for that growth so they can sell you the next round.
Right.
Well, let's rip the hood off and explain to founders that mentality or what happened.
It only works for the investor. I don't think that's what people don't understand, right?
Yeah.
It works for the investor because the investor's goal, rightfully so. I'm not knocking the investor. I'm just saying their goals and our goals are not the same, and don't let them kid you otherwise. Their goal is to just get a markup on the next round. So I invested you in a $10 million valuation. I want you to look like you're taking off and now and get the next round at a $100 million valuation and $1 billion valuation. Why do I want that? I want that because for me, the investor, it makes it look like to my limited partners who gave me money that I am crushing it. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to get 10 companies doing that. Sure, 8 of them are going to fail. And that's the founder's problem, which is why we're not on the side of the table. But the 2 that seem to get some traction are going to look great for me as the investor. And so I want to focus on those. What we're missing in that equation is the investor can afford for us to fail. We can't.
That's a really, really great point. And the investor is going to go out and raise, or that partner, the next $100 million round, take their management fees. And that's how they make money, not based on your startup succeeding. I think that's changing with this recent sort of reset. But let's get back to the founder. And let's just end this here. Let's just be super clear to the founder. The initial default, you're saying this, Will, is to bootstrap. But then when should they raise capital?
When there's no other option. When you've exhausted every possible outlet. And not just that, you're out of time. You have no resources, you have no time. Because a lot of things, given enough time, you don't need capital for. A lot of times people say, well, I need to build the MVP quickly. Do you? Right? In other words, like if you took 6 months to a year, could you avoid raising capital or as much capital by getting the MVP further along yourself? A lot of times that's the case. For me personally, I've always found that if you give me enough time, I can buy enough time. However I get it, I can get most things done. So really, I want to stay in bootstrap mode forever for as long as possible, unless I have no options left.
And if you can build a company to, let's say, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million in revenue, and then maybe if you want to get into that game and you want to go in and go public or go into hyper growth mode, you'd start wanting to compete. Well, then now you've got options to start thinking about raising capital. And that's a completely different game than what you're saying, Will. Most of our founders are going to be in that initial stage A before they even get to stage B.
100%. And that's the point. For us, let's focus on what's best for us as founders, not what's best as for investors. And what's best for us always as founders is to bootstrap and maintain control.